Jimi Hendrix is probably the most important instrumentalist in the history of rock and roll music. He was born in 1942 in Seattle, USA. He did not really have a relationship with his mother, and he did not have a good relationship with his father. And as a result, he turned to music for company and for consolation, very strongly influenced by blues, jazz, rock and roll music. The Chicago blues musician Muddy Waters was a huge influence upon Jimi Hendrix. Muddy Waters was one of the musicians who had taken blues music from the Mississippi Delta to the industrial city of Chicago and electrified the blues. B.B. King, the legendary electric guitar blues player, was also a huge influence upon Jimi Hendrix. And a name that we've heard before, Little Richard. Little Richard was influential in terms of Jimi Hendrix's image, and Jimi Hendrix was very impressed by the image and the stage performance of Little Richard. He was also a big fan of the American rock and roll star Elvis Presley. He had seen Elvis Presley at a live show as a young boy. And in 1956, shortly after seeing Elvis Presley, he got his first electric guitar, immediately became obsessed with the instrument. In 1961, Jimi Hendrix joined the Army, the 1st Airborne Parachute Regiment, and while he was in the Army, formed a band, played guitar all the time, was never really that interested in being in the Army. He was always devoted to his music. And when he left the Army, he immediately became a sideman for various well-known musicians in the United States. For example, the American soul singer, King Curtis, and even for Little Richard himself. And as you can imagine, Jimi Hendrix learned a lot about stage presentation when he worked as a sideman for Little Richard. Now, in 1956, Jimi Hendrix moved to New York and played at one of the most famous music venues in New York. That's the Café War. The Café War was the place where Bob Dylan had become famous, and Jimi Hendrix was a very big admirer of the music of Bob Dylan, and later recorded very well-known and very much admired versions of Bob Dylan's songs. In 1966, Jimi Hendrix was discovered by the British pop musician Chas Chandler, who became his manager and took Jimi Hendrix to London, UK. And it was really in London that the Jimi Hendrix story begins. He immediately formed a band with the British jazz drummer Mitch Mitchell and the British guitar player Noel Redding. The band was known as the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Their first record, Hey Joe, became a successful chart-topping single, and their first album, Are You Experienced, also went straight to the top of the charts. In fact, the Jimi Hendrix Experience experienced overnight success in the United Kingdom. Jimi Hendrix felt very comfortable in the recording studio and pioneered many new effects and recording techniques in the studio. He was completely devoted to the electric guitar. People said that he played the guitar all of the time. He even took the guitar to bed with him, and even when he went to the bathroom, he would take his guitar with him. He became known as the greatest electric guitar player, rock music's greatest showman, and his gimmicks and technique with the guitar, playing the guitar with his teeth, performing a ritualistic guitar sacrifice, became well-known elements of his live performance. In 1967, Jimi Hendrix returned to the United States and performed a triumphant set at the Monterey Pop Festival. He also played at the most famous pop festival of the 1960s, that is the Woodstock Festival, where he played a revolutionary version of the American national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. Jimi Hendrix was in fact left-handed and played his Fender Stratocaster guitar upside down because it was very difficult in those days to find left-handed versions of these instruments. And it is Jimi Hendrix's relationship with technology, which is another very important aspect of his career. He pioneered the use of the wah-wah pedal, the fuzz pedal. He was one of the first musicians to use amplifiers by the revolutionary British technology master Jim Marshall. However, Jimi Hendrix was not only revolutionary in his music, he was also a social revolutionary. He broke down racial barriers in his relationships with women of different races, and was also known as very much a fashion dandy. He was very interested in fashion, and his presentation was a very attractive part of his charisma to his fans. However, after only about 3 or 4 years of stardom, Jimi Hendrix ran into personal problems. He developed a drug addiction, started to be arrested for drug use, and tragically he died in London in 1970 of a drug overdose. Jimi Hendrix will be remembered as the greatest guitar player in rock music history. He is regularly voted the best guitarist of all time in guitar magazines, in music magazines, and still is an inspiration to rock guitarists all over the world. That's Jimi Hendrix, master of the electric guitar.